the Sustainability Management Master's Program, you are answering one simple question. Do you care about your future generation? If you care about your kids, their grandkids, then you care about sustainability. And a sustainability manager is someone who has the tools to make people understand how they can contribute towards developing a sustainable world. We have both part-time and full-time students. Our curriculum is 30 hours. Instead of thesis, we have a research project course and a seminar course which provides them with the kind of research background they will need to be successful in their job. But at the same time, sustainability is not always everything about environment. It also relates to the business. They will take a sustainable business strategies course. They will take a project management course. Most of these courses are going to be taught by industry people, the people who are doing sustainability on a daily basis as a part of their job. Any organization that has a large number of employees and has a physical infrastructure, they will have to have a sustainability office. If you have the passion to develop and maintain a sustainable world, come to us and we will help you shape your passion into a career which will create an impact.
The Stevens Institute of Technology is proud to present the Hugo New Corporation Sustainability Seminar Series, brought to you by Brown & Codwell, Geocetic Consultants, H2M Architect and Engineers, BEM Systems, and Catalyst Group.
Okay, well, we'll go ahead and dive on in, and thank you so much for the introduction. So today I hope to just share a little bit about where I started, my career path, talk to you a little bit about sustainability and environmental management, and then dive into a case study which is oriented around sustainable packaging, which has been kind of the bulk of my work for the past 5 years. So with that, I'll dive on in. Some topics that we'll discuss today, like I mentioned, I'll tell you a little bit about myself and how I got to where I am today, although it does seem very serendipitous at times. I'll tell you a little bit about careers in sustainability management and what to expect. We'll talk a little bit about the business case for sustainability, which is something that I have to make on a pretty regular basis, and then dive into sustainable packaging. Great. So a little bit about me. So I would say that for as long as I can remember, I have been incredibly motivated, like intrinsically, by environmental stewardship. From a child going to national parks to growing up in a food desert, I was always really motivated by sustainable food systems and natural resource management. So for my undergraduate degree, I kind of was able to encapsulate that passion in a professional career track and started with generally an environmental science background, but then started to dive deeper into agricultural ecology given my love for sustainable food systems. And so I was part of the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at the University of Florida, was part of kind of an initial pilot program for this particular track, and had a chance to dive pretty deeply in terms of sustainability management for natural resources within food systems. So that spanned everything from hydrogeology to religion, science, and nature, and really focused on holistic systems level management. And while I was there, I worked with the CSA, worked with our integrated pest management folks on campus, and really found ways to have a technical application for my education. Ultimately, I graduated. I did my capstone project on large-scale irrigation in the high plains and best management practices for agriculture, which kind of got me started in terms of the natural products industry, which is what I work in now. So for me, I didn't really have a career track back then, though. I knew what I wanted to study. I knew that I wanted to run sustainability for either a company or a municipality, or maybe even at the federal level, but really didn't know where to go from there. So living in Florida felt a bit stagnant with that, and ended up moving to Colorado, where I knew the values were more progressive. There was a lot of agricultural production, and like your professor mentioned, a big focus on sustainability. So ultimately, I moved out to Colorado, started working for a small nonprofit that was focused on voter mobilization, water conservation, and that really got me my foot in the door. And then I realized there's 1.5 million different tracks that you can pick with this type of a background. And I knew I wanted to get more technical with my next career choice. So I moved into the solar industry, started working for an entrepreneur out in Denver who was focused on scaling, market-driven renewable energy solutions with a pretty big focus on low-income areas and low-income neighborhood development. So worked there, got into operations. I think one thing that you'll learn too as you move through school and move beyond your graduation date, that oftentimes environmental managers or sustainability managers, that's not necessarily the title that you'll be holding. So I'd say in the past 7 years, at least, of my career, the majority of roles that I've held have been oriented around operations. So operations, supply chain, even marketing at times, but always focused on systems level sustainability. So after the solar industry, I serendipitously found my way into natural products. And when I say natural products, I really just mean anything that you can buy at the store, whether it's household, beauty, food that's oriented around non-GMO, sustainable agriculture, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, finding ways to provide, minimally processed goods to consumers in a way that's, socially and environmentally responsible. And you may know the company Justin's. They're a nut butter company based out of Boulder, Colorado. And for 3 years, I managed all of their corporate responsibility programs. So that was everything from sustainability management, like creating sustainable packaging solutions, supply chain integrity programs, meaning our ingredients. So thinking about our high conflict ingredients like palm oil and almonds, and finding ways to improve connections with suppliers, generate questionnaires to create levels of transparency and accountability, and finding ways to generate improvements through that process. And that was, the supply chain integrity pieces. I think you could do a whole presentation just on that. But as a part of that too, finding ways to take what our mission-driven values were and make them a reality. And so we had, a plethora of hunger relief programs that we worked on, developed local pollinator conservation efforts, worked with local advocacy partners, and did lobby days at the state around end market creation for hard to recycle materials, around better management of public highways. We actually helped to initiate the Colorado's first pollinator highway. It's about 170 miles, where CDOT, our Department of Transportation, now manages it completely differently based on all the recommendations from experts that we helped bring to the table. So even with corporate responsibility, it's such a broad scope, and sustainability management, environmental management is just a piece of it, right? And I think too, the other thing to take into consideration is that we're going beyond compliance at this point. We all know that there's a plethora of different standards depending on where you operate. California is different than Florida, the EU is different than the United States, and complying to various standards based on the claims that your companies want to make. So that's just a piece of it. But for us, that mission-driven element is really what motivates us to move forward, beyond a lens of just compliance. And just to kind of give you a little bit more of that career trajectory, while I was at Justin's, I was fortunate to have them pay for my certificate in corporate social responsibility. So since it was directly aligned with my work at the company and trying to find new resources, and whether that's new tools in my toolkit or new partners, or growing our corporate and my personal network, going to the Leeds School of Business at the University of Colorado Boulder gave me those resources. And so we were able to create some pretty interesting partnerships, and supported a local solar garden that had incorporated pollinators, and found a new hunger relief partner, which we trickled up to one of our parent companies to magnify our overall impact. So that was another pretty unique opportunity. And then finally, I'm in the process right now of wrapping up my master's, which has been a whole nother journey, but really trying to dive deeper into policy and natural resource management. So technically finding conservation applications within supply chains, advocating for infrastructure reform, and really trying to find holistic solutions towards our industry's most daunting social and environmental problems. And we'll go deeper into this, but the theme of today is collaboration and circularity, because we're at the point where the systems that we exist within, capitalist or otherwise, are really not serving our longevity. So we need to find ways to collaborate, to aggregate our respective resources and experience, and find ways to, rapidly innovate to find something that really is holistic. So you'll see in this little kind of career bubble, after Justin's, funny story. So while I was at Justin's, I was trying to identify key resource partners, and it's something that you'll certainly have to do as you dive deeper into your respective work streams. But finding resource partners, trade associations, NGOs, non-government organizations that could help us magnify our impact, right? So for me, the theme was always collective impact. All of us together can certainly move the needle more than just one company alone, and one company alone isn't going to really change the world, and at least not in the magnitude that we need. So while I was at Justin's, I joined the Sustainable Food Trade Association, and we worked together on materiality assessments and climate action plans, and basically a formal review of all of our sustainability management protocols. And after 3 years of working at Justin's, I was actually invited to interview, and then was given an offer to be the executive director of the Sustainable Food Trade Association. So for just over a year, I helped them develop new tools, new resources, new strategic partnerships, started creating a tool that we'll go into a little bit later around packaging formulation impact. But ultimately, like with many sectors at this time, COVID struck, and it really took a blow to our revenue streams. And it was an organization that not necessarily had been in decline, but needed a little bit of revitalization. So right as we were hitting the cusp of some growth, we saw a downward trajectory because of COVID. So rather than spend the next 6 months trying to stay afloat, we created a contingency plan to roll into another organization, but that effectively rolled away my executive director role. So again, somewhat serendipitously, one of my colleagues who's been in my network for the past 5 years, we've collaborated on a lot of packaging endeavors, invited me to join OSC. So one step closer, organic sustainable community. I'll go a little bit more into our work and what we do, but ultimately was given an opportunity to lead their packaging collaborative. And while I was at Justin's, I had joined as a member of the packaging collaborative. I had helped to create a local action group. I pulled together a sustainable brand summit with a few other folks here out in Boulder, Colorado, and trained 100 different industry leaders around sustainable packaging, collaboration, and then innovative solutions. And so that's kind of in a nutshell how I got to where I am today. The other piece of advice that I would give you too, in terms of my career growth and also just magnifying my own impact, because for me, my sort of mantra has always been to drive institutional change through sustainability. So that is a professional goal, certainly, but also a very personal goal that's very, near and dear to my heart. And one thing that I've been also very fortunate is that I've served now on 3 different boards of directors. And so I would say for those of you who are looking for ways to beyond a conventional career step, if you have an opportunity to volunteer with a local nonprofit or identify an NGO partner that resonates pretty closely to where you foresee your career track developing, it's a really unique opportunity. You learn a lot, and it certainly helps you become more well-rounded. So I've been on the board of directors of Naturally Boulder for the past 3 years, actually just got moved into the vice president role there on that board, was on the board of the Climate Collaborative through my work at Sustainable Food Trade Association, and then OMRI, the Organic Material Review Institute. I just joined their board a few months ago, and we're really focused on organic standards for finished goods for agriculture. So in a nutshell, that's my career. Your professor kindly mentioned my Green Biz 30 Under 30 recognition, which was I felt very honored, but also truly inspired by some of my other colleagues in that list. And I'm excited that you'll be hearing from them in different sessions this semester. The year before that, in the Environment and Energy Leader, they put out a list of 100 different leaders that they recognize on an annual basis, and I was recognized for my collaborative packaging work. You'll hear me talk a lot about packaging. And then the year before that, the city of Boulder actually recognized me as a rising star leader in our community, and again, focused on those collective impact programs, not just packaging, but the work in the pollinator gardens that we planted, and the hunger relief programs, and the classroom scholarships, and a lot of those initiatives that were very close to the brand's heart when I was at Justin's. So with that, no more talking about me. We'll go a little bit more into detail now around careers in sustainability management. I'm sure most of you have heard of the triple bottom line, but people, planet, and profit is what we always talk about. We're starting to see a quadruple bottom line, which incorporates purpose as one of the 4 elements. But ultimately, there's a unique opportunity today, especially with increasing regulations and need for compliance around ESG, environmental social governance, for sustainability professionals to thrive. So as sustainability becomes more embedded in global business, there are an increasing number of us who are trying to find our niche. And kind of like I described to you earlier, it's taken me a while to get to the level of being at a director level and working very specifically on sustainable packaging. And I can tell you, when I was at Justin's, when I started, 25% of my role was sustainability, and when I left, 75% of it was. And it's all about making the business case, which we'll go into a little bit later. But I would say that there's some pretty positive trends right now. And even if you're not thinking about sustainability management in food systems, or even a role that technically includes sustainability, maybe you're an environmental engineer, maybe you're a hydrogeologist, there's, I would say, businesses across sectors. And if you think too about sustainable investments, I know BlackRock recently made their commitment to removing emissions from their investments. And I think you can see, the 25 biggest CPG, consumer packaged goods, that's my industry, they're making commitments, vocal, externally facing commitments. And you can see in this slide, it says 1/3 of CEOs take a long-term view of sustainability, and 95% of companies have a sustainability program management office. So I think you're starting to see businesses are valuing the triple bottom line approach. Businesses are using sustainability as a differentiator in the marketplace. And, it's a unique opportunity for those of us who are passionate about these things to really make a career out of it. Just a quick kind of overview of some of the things I thought might be interesting. The occupational outlook for our sector is really positive right now. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics actually projects an 11% growth from, 2016 until 2026 for environmental specialists. And like I said, those careers can span everything. When I first started at Justin's, they called me an external relations manager. And that doesn't really sound very environmental management-y, but it was. And so you could be a consultant, you could work with an NGO like I currently do now. OSC too is a nonprofit trade association that works to mobilize all of our industry leaders around, solving the most pressing social and environmental issues. And then obviously state and federal resource agencies. These are all growing sectors for our career trajectory. And one thing I will probably press on a few times while we're on the line today is that this career path can be incredibly rewarding and directly impactful. And especially when we're all trying to find ways in our personal lives to lower our carbon footprints, or find ways maybe to even enact change in the cities that we live in. I know I work with the city of Boulder quite a lot on their waste management programs, and part of a few different sustainability councils, but this really helps drive companies and drive businesses and drive whole sectors towards a more holistic management of their companies. And, the business case for sustainability, especially with COVID, especially what's happening in the world today, cash flow is an issue. And so how do you convince companies really invest in sustainability, right? I think those of us who are here, we understand that there's an initial capital investment that needs to be made in order to enact a sustainability program, but ultimately the resilience that it provides you, the consumer loyalty, the marketplace differentiation, like I mentioned before, there are a whole slew of benefits that businesses can tout to really push forward their corporate responsibility programs. You know, and you'll see here as sustainability professionals, whether you're working for a company or you're doing environmental remediation, it's our job to really find ways to focus stakeholders, whether those are investors, companies, cities, for-profit, nonprofits, to take urgent action. And that might be environmental cleanup, that might be, you know, compliance with NEPA, it might be, you know, there could be so many different pieces of what sustainability environmental management means for your role. But we need to find a way to build back better, which I'm sure you guys have heard, especially in the past few months. We need to build back better. We need to incorporate climate action, and we need to really think about true resilience for our food systems, for our business models, for the way that our cities operate, truly trickling through all elements of our daily lives. And like I mentioned, sustainability and environmental management crosses a broad spectrum, but some of the spectrums that I've worked the most in are sustainable business practices, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, because without a diversity of perspective and understanding too that climate change is hitting marginalized communities the most, if we don't have that equity and diversity piece, then all the due diligence of sustainable supply chains truly means nothing. We're talking too now more about regenerative supply chains than just sustainable, right? Sustaining something means that you're leaving it the same way for future generations, whereas regeneration means that you're finding ways to invest in the cycle, to build back stronger. So when we talk about regenerative supply chains, we're talking about carbon drawdown and soil health, and really finding ways, like, since the Rodale Institute says that we only have 50 years of topsoil left, how can we find ways to strengthen that to ensure resilience in our food system? You know, we'll go deeper into packaging as a case study, but that has really been the bulk of my work for the past 5 years. Recyclable, truly recyclable, which is a big distinction to make, and compostable packaging. And then corporate give back programs that align directly with the areas of your supply chain that you're looking to improve. So there's definitely a way to be strategic about it. One of the more tangible examples that I can give you when I was at Justin's is once we did a materiality assessment, we identified what our internal stakeholders cared about, you know, our suppliers, our parent company, our employees, and then we also did an external stakeholder assessment with a lot of our consumers and core retail partners, and then I used that to identify some core areas of impact, and one of those areas was pollinator conservation. If you don't know, 1 in 3 bites of food that you eat are impacted by pollinators, and as a nut butter company who makes almond butter, 80% of the world's almonds are grown in California. 100% of domestically sourced almonds are grown in California. And obviously California is seeing significant pollinator decline like the rest of the world. They're seeing issues with drought. So there really needs to be an integration within our supply chain to ensure that over time, we still have access to all of our ingredients, ideally with room to grow in terms of the, you know, minimum order amounts that we're sourcing. So on a local level, we worked with the city of Boulder. We planted pollinator gardens, engaged our employees, got them out volunteering, pulling weeds, planting plants. It was really fun, actually. We used to do a volunteer day once a month that would support each of our areas of action. And then on a state level, we worked with the People and Pollinators Action Network on the political advocacy and infrastructure. So I mentioned that the Colorado Pollinator Highway Project, which is one of those pieces. And then we worked with a national partner, Xerces, out in our California almond orchards. So working on native bees, bringing back the blue orchard bee, which is a native bee to the Central Valley of California. They help European honeybees, which are the agricultural commodity that's shipped from the Southeast to California once a year for the almond bloom. That could be a whole topic for discussion too, but if you don't know about it, it's very interesting. So it's like very unsustainable. And so we found ways to take a local, state, and national supply chain approach to that program to really make sure that our impact was trickling all the way from our community through the very top of our supply chain. So it's an example I like to share. And this is just a little bit more on kind of what we just talked about, right? So you have consumer loyalty and buying power as one of the real drivers of the business case for sustainability. I have another slide on here, but consumers are using their spending power. We call it voting with your dollar. And really that materiality assessment that I mentioned, where we got our external stakeholders and we basically did an analysis of all of our consumer feedback and identified some core areas of sustainability that they wanted us to grow within, you know, where they felt like we weren't really doing enough as a company. And so what can we do more? What, if we can't fix it today, what sort of externally facing goals can we set and what milestones can we establish to reach those? So I think too, don't discount the power of consumer insights when it comes to making the business case. And also the marketplace differentiation. I'd say one of the biggest things that we did and at Justin's and now, you know, through my other two roles after that is finding opportunities at the retail level, finding opportunities at e-commerce, basically identifying your main revenue streams, doing an analysis of what their corporate responsibility or sustainability or environmental management programs are and finding alignment, because now you have differential treatment from your core retail base and you're finding an opportunity to scale your impact. So really, I mean, that serves two purposes in and of itself. The supply chain resilience piece, especially when we talk about climate change, especially when we talk about topsoil, there's really a lot of work that we need to do to basically regenerate these conventional production models and monocultures and, you know, reliance on genetically modified food, which certainly has its applications, you know, for hunger relief and nutrition, but not at the scale and not with the agribusiness monoculture focus that exists today. So it's a chance to grow operational capacity and revenue through a lens of sustainability. And then the last piece is stakeholder engagement, and you have brand loyalty, you have customer retention. I mentioned those retail partnerships, media coverage. I think in the 3 years that I was at Justin's, we were nominated for over 30 different awards over those years, from like Veg News to recognition at our industry's biggest summit. It's called Expo West. 80,000 people attend, and I spoke on a panel in front of 700 people all about collaboration and climate action. And so it's also a pretty unique opportunity for businesses to be seen as thought leaders in their space and in their sector, and especially if you're oriented around open source resources and opportunity to really drive collective impact within your industry. And here's just a little stat that I also like to share. So there's a huge market for sustainability and sustainability labeled products. You know, $128.5 million was spent in 2018 on sustainable, fast moving consumer goods. So year over year, that was a 20% increase in sustainable product sales in a year. And there have been a few studies, and actually this study was from 2017, but 48% of consumers in the US are likely to change what they meet or what they buy to meet environmental standards. And that is a trend that we continuously see growing, and consumers are definitely more likely to switch away from a brand loyalty model that's oriented around price and efficiency to find ways to incorporate claims like sustainable packaging, sustainable ingredients, fair trade, B Corp, a lot of these elements, and obviously organic and non-GMO when it comes to ingredients. So there's, like I mentioned, there's a huge drive in terms of consumers voting with their dollars and finding basically ways to quantify that impact in terms of sales to the people on the executive team when you have to make the business case for sustainability. And now we'll dive a little bit more into my work on sustainable packaging. And I say my work, but it truly is our work. the things that we've accomplished and the things that GreenBiz was kind enough to highlight me for this year, I did not do on my own. I feel like I am a great facilitator, a middlewoman, if you will, where I have cultivated my personal and professional networks over the years, basically read everything that comes my way, volunteer for everything that comes my way, and just try to find ways to make connections with stakeholders and sectors that maybe wouldn't exist otherwise. So when it comes to packaging, one thing that I'm working on right now for OSC2 is we do shelf life studies on compostable packaging. I'll kind of go into that, but basically finding ways from design where, you know, a brand would work with a firm to design a new package all the way to recovery. So working with waste haulers, working with composters to make sure that during the design process, we're designing for recovery, and then all the pieces in between. So you can kind of see here, for us, the issue of packaging is that it touches all aspects of today's material economy, and it plays such an important role in delivering goods and services in a global market. And obviously, the prevalence of plastic packaging, especially plastic flexible packaging, means that most of that ends up in the environment. If you haven't read it, NPR just released a really great piece on why recycling was never meant to work, why it was more or less a ploy for us to continue to produce plastic. And there's been a few studies and white papers that have come out, and roughly 9% of all plastic ever created has been recycled. And even when we talk about recycling, that's not really recycling or upcycling, it's often downcycling, and there's a certain number of times that you can do that before the material loses its integrity. So ultimately, there's no circularity in the way that we design plastic packaging today. And so when we're talking about the theme of today, collaboration and circularity, there needs to be ways to, instead of this, you know, take waste model, which is a linear model, we need to find ways to reincorporate that waste as a value proposition within a circular stream, a circular resource stream, or even beyond resources, a circular business model, right? You can even think of circularity in terms of sort of like personnel management, right? So I think it can span a lot of applications when you think about circularity. But ultimately, when it comes to packaging, we have a circular model in mind, right? We start with designing for sustainability. While we're designing, we find ways, okay, can we reduce the materials that we're using? Can we innovate around a new material? And if not, we have to find ways to invest in infrastructure and material solutions. So, for example, flexible pouches, like a stand-up pouch. Like if you go and you buy a bag of rice, that pouch is called a stand-up pouch. And right now, a brand could tell you that it's recyclable, but it is not recyclable at a municipal level. So you could not throw that in to your recycling bin, because if you did, it would go to the material recovery facility. It would jam up their line. They'd have a ton of down line time, a ton of extra labor costs, and they would still end up throwing this package away because there's not an end market for it. Most stand-up pouches are polymers that are multi-layer structures. And so when you think about packaging, that's why it's so important to design for recovery in mind, because even if you use a polymer that is technically recyclable, if it's in a structure that doesn't work for the MRF, the material recovery facility, then the due diligence of the material sourcing means nothing. And so the other piece of it that you could probably infer is that you need to educate consumers on how to dispose of things in terms of end of life. And you also need to educate key stakeholders. So whether that's a retail partner, whether that is perhaps, you know, like for Justin's, we sold a lot of our products at Starbucks and at coffee shops. And so how can we find ways to educate our partners and our consumers, whether that's on packaging, through a campaign, on our website, to make sure that they're doing the right thing when it comes to our packaging, especially if we've invested significant money in some sort of a material transition. And then ultimately advocating for policy reform and producer responsibility. You know, for example, we're working on a few policy initiatives at OSC, and I also work with an organization called Recycle Colorado. and we're really focused on creating end markets, finding ways to reduce the barrier to scale for development of new materials, working with the Department of Transportation, working with the Department of Health and Environment to really create a solution that brings together the perspective of all of these key stakeholders, and that's how you achieve circularity. So there's an opportunity for all of, I think it was something like $8 billion of salvageable resources that went into landfills in Colorado in 2019. So what can we do to divert those items from the landfill? What can we do to recycle, upcycle, downcycle? And if there's something that doesn't have a value that we can't create an end market for, how do we transition away from that material? So that gives you a perspective about the kind of systems level approach that I try to take when we cover sustainable packaging. Now we'll kind of go a little bit into OSC2. So like I mentioned, I joined the packaging collaborative about 4.5 years ago when I was at Justin's, but the collaborative had been alive and is now in its 7th year. And at OSC2, what we are is a collective of change makers that elevate ourselves, our organizations, and the industry that we work in to prioritize regenerative business. And we really started as a network of CEOs and founders who are trying to tackle the most pressing issues of our industry. And so the packaging collaborative is what I run, and it's really focused on the transition and removal away from petroleum-based plastic. So we know that it ends up in landfills, we know that it ends up in oceans, we know that it ends up in the environment in so many ways and causes tons of negative ramifications. But what we see as an opportunity, especially for flexible packaging, is compostable and renewable flexible film structures. So what we've done over the years is we've brought in material providers, we've brought in waste haulers, we've brought in NGOs, we've brought in legislative advisors, and basically have all of the players at a table within this collaborative to try to identify the pain points to scale, to find ways to have sort of a rapid prototype model of let's find ways to fail faster so we can build back together and obviously build back better. And we really just think that that collaboration and collective impact is the way that we're going to reach, a plastic-free future. We work right now with over 40 brands and over 50 stakeholders. We just brought the U.S. Composting Council on. The Composters Manufacturers Alliance just joined us as well. So we're basically trying to make connections from the brands to the material providers, to the policy advocates, to basically the folks who do a lot of the end certifying or waste recovery, to make sure that we're thinking of all of the very distinct and diverse elements that are required for us to scale compostable packaging. And you can see some of the brands over there. There's some pretty big ones like Ben & Jerry's and Campbell's. Justin's is still part of it, which I love to see. The legacy is still there, Dr. Bronner's. But ultimately, yeah, we have over 40 brands who are committed to finding sustainable solutions for their packaging. This also kind of goes back to that business case for sustainability. Wherever you can, outline year-over-year growth, outline opportunities for revenue, outline opportunities for thought leadership, and however you can quantify that return on investment, do, because your executive team will love you for it. For us, collaboration really is key to innovating faster. You scale your impact, and you can have a pretty large magnitude in terms of your collective buying power, the collective revenue that you bring to your state, to your city, to the country, and really use that to drive infrastructure shifts to support your sustainable sourcing and design. And, you can see a little bit in this food service packaging market growth projection. And I know we've talked about it a little bit before, but there's significant growth and innovation opportunities through a lens of sustainability. And also another thing that I'd suggest you read if you haven't already is CDP put out a report recently that said that there is a $2.1 trillion market for low emissions tech and products innovation. So even though we think that it's going to cost a significant amount in order to to really push back in a meaningful way on climate change, there's also a very unique business opportunity, again, to be an early adopter, to be an innovator, to be a thought leader, and try to scale these through your respective industries. So expect to see more rapid prototyping when it comes to that. And this is a little outline of what we really do at OSC. So how do we address those barriers to scale, and how do we overcome them? We do it through collective purchasing power. So we work with our material providers, and we have material discounts on compostable films. We have shared purchasing power through shelf life studies. We have affinity partnerships where our members get discounts or special access or additional resources to basically help them build momentum around their sustainable packaging goals. Stakeholder collaboration. The next slide will show you some of our partners, our converters, brands, owners, NGOs. But this radical collaboration model allows us to design from a systems level to make sure we're really incorporating all of the perspectives of all of the stakeholders at the table, not just thinking about a system optimized for pricing and efficiency, which is our current plastic-based model. We also help to support shared campaigns. So we have, since our inception, we've had 5 companies launch certified sustainable products as a result of our work together. And accompanying those were educational consumer-facing campaigns. One was Gone for Good, which was Alter Eco's campaign when they launched their home compostable truffle wrappers. And then Leaf No Trace was for Numi whenever they transitioned to their plant-based tea packaging. So again, it goes back to that circular design model for sustainability. And if you don't have education as a core concept, then the due diligence of your material sourcing and your design is, sometimes undermined. And then the sort of academic and scientific part of things is in our comparative studies. So we engage in LCAs, in climate impact reports, end of life impact, field testing, meaning we work with composters to ensure that our packaging breaks down, and shelf life studies to help us achieve the barrier requirements that we need from a packaging lens. Did somebody raise their hand? Does that mean you have a question?
Yes, I have a question.
Yeah.
When you say compostable, are you talking about commercially compostable or traditionally compostable?
So we're talking about compliance with the ASTM standards that BPI has in place. So there's no home compostable certification for the US at this point. So we're talking about the ASTM standards here. So for example, Alter Eco has a fully certified through BPI truffle wrapper, but it is also home compostable based on their tests. They can't claim a certification through that. They can only claim the BPI ASTM 6400, I think. And then you have Numi, which is undergoing certification right now, but they launched as plant-based tea wrapper. So you'll see kind of a few different ways of labeling it on a consumer-facing lens, but no home compostable certification for the US at this point. You could certainly do a testing to like an international standard though.
Okay, so if I see like a package, say like Justin's, whatever they have, and I look at it, how would I know if I can compost that in my house or not?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. So Green Blue has how to recycle and how to compost, which are kind of the leaders in terms of consumer education. So that would be a little like label on pack that says, compost me in an industrial facility, or like for the stand-up pouch. There's a few that you can recycle, but only at a store drop-off, and it has to be clean and dry. And so you give your packaging specs to Green Blue, and they tell you what label to use based on that. So that's one way. And then for consumers who know to look for compostable, you would look for the BPI logo or the ASTM standard call out.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. But it's actually something that we're working on right now in an incubation project to try to find a way to improve labeling of those types of things, because it's very confusing. And as somebody who's spent the past 5 years diving pretty deeply into it and working with a lot of material experts, it's still really hard. And even when I'm identifying different polymers at home, I still don't know sometimes if it's not expressly labeled. So one thing I would say too is if you don't see something on it and you're not sure, do not wish cycle and do not wish compost, because then composters and recyclers are going to see it as a contaminant and they're not going to want to create a market for it. So that's why it's like all of those pieces of stakeholder management are so important.
Okay, so if it says BPI or ASTI, I can compost it in my house?
No. So yeah, that's the thing, is you'll have to see some sort of call out to home compostable. And the big difference there is heat and time. So when you have there's actually a couple different types of composting rows and methodologies. I suggest, if you want to learn a little bit more about those, CMA, Composter Manufacturing Alliance, has a pretty good presentation on them. But ultimately, the temperature that you can get in your backyard compost is much different than what they can achieve at a composting facility. And also, you're not rotating every 45 days to aerate and add moisture. And so it's like, that's why the compliance to the ASTM standard is tied to how composters manage their, basically, piles.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Awesome question.
10 more minutes.
Okay, I got this.
Okay.
And so collaboration, like I said, is kind of the key to our success. You'll see how we work here. So we have material manufacturer partners, converters, and basically you have material providers. So these are the folks who like actually make like plastics and polymers and things. Converters who will take that material and make it into a finished package that then goes to a brand. And then you have NGOs in there like the Composting Council, Recology, and BPI that we work with to basically ensure that as we're designing, it's, you know, designed for recovery. So yeah, on here, I think we've kind of covered these elements, but scaling market-driven solutions is really important. Like I said, you have to make the business case for sustainability. So wherever you can find collective purchasing power or material discounts, that's definitely an opportunity to pursue. And make sure you're advocating for infrastructure reform. And to your question there, make sure you're educating consumers with clear and concise messaging. And the FTC has their green marketing guidelines that we all have to be compliant with, but I'm sure you've seen a lot of companies who do their fair share of greenwashing to the minimum levels that they can to still comply with those marketing standards. And this is just a little piece of what we've accomplished to date. So this is with our packaging collaborative. So we have over 50 companies that are working together. We launched a flexible film summit this year where we brought together 80 different stakeholders. So we brought like Mars and Pepsi and all of the waste haulers and EcoCycle and political advocates and consumer-facing organizations and marketing specialists. And now we're working on these 8 incubation projects. So one of them's on labeling. I'm working on one that's on policy. We have a third one that's focused on a rapid innovation prototype so that we can create basically the structure for, it's kind of a linear model, but what brands have to go through and how they need to think, like meeting barrier requirements, shelf life testing, distribution chain testing, and field testing, and making sure that their ultimate output is actually compliant to those compostable standards. We've had 5 different structures that have actually launched successfully in the market as a result of the work in the shelf life studies and trials that we've done. And we've had 15 companies so far, including like Patagonia, Ben & Jerry's, and a few other pretty big names participate in our shelf life studies. We also have a few other projects and partnerships that I'm really proud of. So we definitely have a focus on open source resources. So basically the things that we create are not intellectual property for OSC. This is a way to really, like, you know, a rising tide raises all ships. So we're working on a packaging formulation tool. So in the same way that you could maybe say, I have a nut butter product, I'm going to use organic almonds or I'm going to use conventional almonds. And it's basically an LCA tool that allows you to quantify the opportunity cost of different sourcing practices. So in the same way that we've built something like that for ingredients in our industry, we're now building it for packaging. So you can substitute out now a compostable film or a recyclable structure, or changing to something that's paper-based, that, or something that's compostable that comes from like a GMO corn or from a non-GMO sugar cane. So ultimately, this tool will allow you to do a comparative analysis against your own packaging portfolio and against competitors in your industry. So again, like making the business case for it, right? Like if your competitor is doing it and they're showing growth and they're showing, we have some data, and one of them is called spins. And so if spins comes back and says that these 4 categories are trending, this is the growth that we expect, and we think that it's aligned with sustainable packaging innovation, and that's a way to really push that return on investment piece. We're working with one of our industry's biggest media partners on a sustainable packaging toolkit. So the toolkit, again, is open source, and it basically helps everyone think about like innovative new materials, thinking about infrastructure, thinking about recovery, thinking about shared consumer campaigns and shared language around educating folks about compostable packaging. And then we work too with the Climate Collaborative, which was one of our impact programs that we developed at OSC. But we work with TRIAC to do case studies with them that basically quantify the overall improvement in your environmental impact from switching to a plant-based or a renewable package. The Flexible Film Summit that I just mentioned is an industry collaborative we launched this year. And then we've been working with Plastic Free California, the Californians Against Waste campaign. So, in the same way that we supported Recology and the standard sort of coloration for compostable bags out in Washington, we're working now in California on a ballot initiative to help support similar endeavors, producer responsibility bills that ultimately will deliver funding for infrastructure improvements. And then we leverage a lot of shared cost models. So we work with Clemson University on shelf life studies so that we can meet barrier requirements, because, you know, packaging has to do a lot of things. It has to keep your product safe. It has to keep it like beautiful during shipping. It has to deliver nutritional information to your consumers. There's a million things packaging has to do, but one thing that it needs to be incorporated is, you know, sustainability and circularity. So shelf life studies are pretty important. Field testing with composters to make sure that your certified compostables actually do break down the way that you plan. And then working with Loop, who it's a TerraCycle project that is leveraging the Milkman model. So you'll see a lot of sustainable packaging commitments that say recyclable, reusable, or compostable by 2025. So Loop is a part of that basically portfolio approach to packaging. I also like to always just share a little bit about our resource partners. So when it comes to the work that we do, we're not doing this in a silo. You know, radical collaboration is at the heart of really scalable impact programs. So working with all of these organizations to basically outline shared external facing goals so that we can be more strategic about reaching them together. And just what's next. So I always like to end a presentation with a call to action. And though you guys aren't the normal companies that I would be pitching something like this to, there are a lot of opportunities for advocacy, for consumer engagement, for thought leadership as we improve our packaging portfolios. So, you know, what I always suggest is to set forward-looking goals. You know, maybe you can't do it today and it's 2020, but maybe by 2025 you can achieve some core milestones and really make true to an externally facing packaging commitment. I also think getting outside the box around new structures and new materials is really important, because we have paper-based flexible packaging. Nestle's used it for some of their candies, and Yes, Yes is like one of their European lines. You know, packaging like that. Tubes are more common substitutes for conventional plastic, and programs like TerraCycle's Loop offer high-end reusable solutions that allow you to engage in new markets. So again, like an opportunity for growth. Messaging, ensuring consistency and clarity, and then again, let's wrap it all up with collaboration. So collaborating with industry experts, diverse stakeholders, and thought leaders to create systemic change. And that is it.